Funding for Bea Ojakangas' Welcome to My Kitchen is provided by the citizens of Minnesota through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
Delicious homemade soups paired perfectly with creative breads. That's what's cooking today. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm Bea Ojakangas, cookbook author, food writer, columnist, wife, mother, and grandmother. I've spent my life learning about food and sharing my knowledge with others. It's given me a certain perspective on cooking, rooted in the flavors, traditions, and rhythms of life in northern Minnesota, and a passion for sharing what I know. Welcome to my kitchen. Well, soup and bread is something that I've always enjoyed serving. Soup and bread in this part of the country, you know, this weather, this winter weather is soup and bread weather. I do those a lot at church on for our Lenten suppers. We have soup and bread suppers, and we just sort of expanded into a lot of different areas. But so that was the basic inspiration for soups and breads. And then, you know, you need to refine. I always need to refine and hone down the ideas and be sure that the bread and the soup go together, so that you're not gonna put out a soup that takes 2 minutes to make with a 6-hour loaf of bread, you know. So kind of match the timing and the tastes and everything. Today we're going to do some recipes from my soup and bread cookbook, and we're going to do a roasted red pepper soup, and then the bread that goes with it is an herbed muffin, and then we're doing asparagus soup, and we're doing some interesting breadsticks with that. So we'll start out by roasting the red bell peppers, and I have my own way of doing that. And sometimes people say that's not the right way, because you're supposed to take the whole pepper and you're supposed to put it in the oven or over a flame and keep rotating it. And I find that is just a drag. I don't really like to do it that way. So what I do is I'll take the pepper and try to pull off the stem, cut it in half, and then open it up, and then remove the seeds and the white stuff in there, and that way we don't have all that white stuff to deal with when we're peeling the pepper. So we take the peppers, and I'll clean this off, get rid of all these go into take it to the compost pile. And then I'll put them upside down, 6 of them, upside down onto a cookie sheet that is covered with foil. And what we want to do is just sprinkle them with olive oil, and roasting them with olive oil makes them roast much more quickly, because the oil picks up the heat in the oven, and that will make I'm just kind of with my fingers spreading it around. Okay. Then we go to the oven, and I preheat my oven to as high as it'll go on the convection roast. Into the oven, and we'll watch that. It'll take about 15 to 20 minutes. So here we are. We've got the outer leaf. I'm not going to use the really fibrous outer leaves, but we'll chop the rest of the leaf into about 1/4-inch slices. And I'll go up about as far as the dark leaves begin to show, because they won't cook. Now what else we need is 1 large onion, which I've already chopped and it's ready to go. I like to use leeks and onions when I can get them. If I can't get them, well, then I'll just substitute another onion for it. But the leeks have nice color, and they add an interesting flavor to the pot. Now when the peppers are roasting, we can make our herbed muffins that go with this particular soup. It's one that I put together in the bread and soup cookbook. So the roasted red bell pepper soup and the herbed muffins go together. We start out by mixing 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour and a tablespoon of sugar, a teaspoon of thyme, and I'll just take a generous pinch, and marjoram. Those are the herbs. And then we need 2 teaspoons of baking powder, which I did not measure ahead of time. Two teaspoons of baking powder. We can just put them all together at one time. Half a teaspoon of baking soda, and the reason we have baking soda is because we're going to use buttermilk as liquid, and buttermilk has an acidic quality to it, and the baking soda is a base, so the two work together to raise the muffins. Okay, then the liquids here. Oh, got to put my little salt in here. Half a teaspoon of salt. We'll stir that in. And we're going to add a half a cup of melted butter. That's 1 stick. And a half a cup of buttermilk. That just gives a nice flavor. So we just stir that just until the dry ingredients are moistened. Just like that. I'm going to add a splash more of buttermilk, because in the wintertime the flour is a little bit dry because the air is dry. And so sometimes you have to kind of add a little bit more liquid on that account. So we're going to do this, turn this until all the dry ingredients are moistened. And the reason I call these biscuit muffins is that this looks like a biscuit dough. So we're going to put them into a muffin tin, and that's why we call them muffins. The muffin tin, you can either line the muffin tin with papers, but I'm just going to spray them with cooking spray. And then we're going to scoop the dough into the muffin tins. And it looks like a dry dough, but that's why we call it a biscuit dough. So it could be, we could actually make these into biscuits if we wanted to. And you have to kind of divide them equally. These go into a 400-degree oven for about 12 to 15 minutes. Okay, looks like our peppers are ready, and this is what you're looking for, a sort of blackened outside on the peppers themselves. And I'm going to just take them out of the oven. And now the next step with this is to wrap them up so that they steam. So we're going to steam the peppers, and one of the easiest ways is to have the peppers sitting on foil, and then we're just going to wrap the foil shut. And foil does not feel real hot when you take it straight out of the oven, so it's very easy. Now it'll take about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and the peppers will steam, and we can pull the skins off. Our onions are nicely caramelized in the pot, and we're going to add our potatoes, our diced Yukon Gold potatoes. And then we're going to add 4 cups of chicken broth and let all that come to a boil. And they're still steaming. Look at that. Okay, but they've cooled off enough so I can handle them. I've got asbestos fingers anyway. And you see, when we do this, how easily the skin comes off. And see that? And it's just so simple compared to how juicy and messy it can be. Okay, our peppers are all peeled and they're ready to be cut up to put into the soup. Now I'm not going to be real fussy about how I cut them. I'm just going to use a pair of scissors and cut right through them and then turn this whole bunch into the soup pot and stir it around. And because everything by now is cooked, we can go ahead and puree this. We're going to puree the whole soup in the blender. We'll just put the soup right into the blender container. We're going to have to do it 2 or 3 times to get it all pureed, because there's going to be approximately about a dozen cupfuls, which would be about 8 servings. Okay, we want to blend. There, nice and steamy hot. And these bowls are from the empty bowl, so they're all a little different, and I just love them because they're different sizes and they look different and they have different colors, and to me that makes it really fun to serve soup that way. Now we're going to decorate the top with some sour cream. Here are our muffins. Actually, they do look like biscuits, and that's why we call them biscuit muffins. And they are actually quite delicious. Oh, I can smell the herbs in there. Really good. I don't know where I get it from, but my interest is always a little bit ahead of the rest of the world. And I suppose my ear is tuned to new ideas. And sometimes the new ideas register and I'm not even sure they register. But that's one way to keep things fresh. But I also want to know for sure that I'm using things that are, in season. It's a real funny thing, but chanterelle soup tastes the best in the fall when the chanterelles are fresh. And I didn't realize that until one time when I was in Germany in the first part of December talking with a friend, and he said, Lebkuchen does not taste as good other times of year. And I realized pumpkin pie doesn't taste as good for Easter as it does for Thanksgiving. What is it? It's the seasonal thing. Things in season always taste better. And I kind of keep that in mind when I'm doing menus, always checking to see what is fresh and new. Next we're going to make an asparagus sipping soup and some creative breadsticks. I'll start out by chopping the onion, and this is one of those nice sweet onions. Then we cut the onions into dice, and we don't have to be really particular about that because we're going to end up pureeing the soup anyway. Into my heavy pot, we add 4 tablespoons or half of a stick of butter. And then we're going to add the onions. And while they are beginning to cook, we're going to clean the asparagus. We're going to need approximately 1.5 pounds of asparagus. But what we have to do with the asparagus is cut off the tough ends. So doing it that way, this is 2 pounds of asparagus, and by the time we get the tough ends cut off, we're down to the 1.5 pounds that we need for the soup. Now we want to cut them into approximately 1-inch pieces. And we don't have to be real fussy about that either, because we're going to puree the soup anyway. And I like to save a few little ends just for decoration. Some of the pretty ends of the asparagus. So I'll set that aside. And the rest will go into the pot with the onions. It takes about 4 minutes for the onions to get kind of almost transparent. And then we're going to throw in 3 cloves of garlic, because that just adds to the flavor. And again, we don't have to be real fussy about how we do that. That goes in with the onions. Okay, let's take our asparagus and put it in the pot to cook. Once they get all covered with a little bit of the butter that's in there, we're going to add 3 cups of chicken broth. And now that has to cook. It'll take about 20 minutes for this to cook down to the point where we can run it through the blender again, because this becomes a smooth soup. While the soup is cooking, we'll make the dough for our breadsticks, and they're going to be kind of fun. It's something you might want to do with the kids if you have kids around. For the breadsticks, what we need is 1.5 cups of warm water, a package or a scant tablespoon of dry yeast. Then we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt and approximately 1 tablespoon of honey. This is a special honey that is grown right in this area, and I got this at the farmer's market. What else we add to this is 1/4 cup of canola oil or vegetable oil. And then we're going to add 2 cups of whole wheat flour. These are healthy. Let's see. Stir that in. Then we're going to add 1.5 cups of flour. Let's sprinkle my work area, and I'll do this right on the countertop with flour, and turn the dough out. Now I'll dust the dough with flour and do some kneading. And a lot of people don't know what you mean by kneading, and all we're doing when we're kneading is folding the dough back over itself, like so. And in doing that, what we're doing really is mixing all the ingredients together really well. Now we're going to shape the breadsticks, and what I want to do is do the breadsticks 2 different ways. So I cut the dough in half, and I'll set that one aside. And this one I'm going to cut into bigger breadsticks. So we again dust the area with flour and take the dough and spread it out. I have some egg whites that have been in the refrigerator, and they're left over from some other project, and I like to use them to make the sesame seeds and sunflower seeds stick to the breadsticks. So there we are. We're going to sprinkle sunflower seeds. And these are the ones that they're roasted but not salted. And then we're going to sprinkle them also with sesame seeds. I like the crunch and the flavor of both the sesame seeds and the sunflower seeds. And we're going to cut the dough into strips. Then once we do that, we can roll it around like this and we'll end up with you just take it and that gives you kind of a pretty texture. We can put them right away into a 300-degree oven for about 30 minutes. Now we're going to take the second half of the dough and I cut it into quarters and we're going to put it in the pasta maker and shape very creative breadsticks. And I just want to be sure that we've dusted the dough well with flour, because if you don't, you'll have some problems. Okay, we start out by rolling the dough on the widest possible length. Dust both sides again with flour, because you don't want it to get all sticky inside the pasta maker. So be sure you've got plenty of flour around. That's the same thing that you do if you were making pasta. So I'm going to run that through one more time. Okay, we're going to take the fettuccine cutter. Is it coming through okay? Yeah. You can shape them however you want. You can make them into you know, different kinds of shapes. Separate them a little bit and make it look like a stem of a flower or of a plant. Oops, there's some more. And that's really kind of fun, isn't it? Now, again, we'll brush them with some egg white. And we'll put these into the oven to bake. These bake much more quickly than the other ones. So while these bake and the other ones are finishing up, we will be able to finish up our soup. We're going to put it into the blender while it's still hot, but we'll put it back into the pot to warm it up again. Smells like spring. Then we turn the blender on to blend. And I always keep the cover on, because it can happen that it'll spit right in your face if you just turn it on without having a cover on it. There we go. I like to serve the soup in demi-tasse cups, kind of like these. You might have, I've got two different kinds here, but this is kind of fun to serve, and people can just sort of stand around and eat and have their soup and then munch on a breadstick at the same time. Our breadsticks are ready to take out of the oven. There's a little bit of leeway time there, so if you want to keep them in a little bit longer, you can, or you take them out before. But you want to be sure that they're going to be nice and crispy. So here we go. Aren't they pretty? So here we are with our breadsticks with sesame seeds and sunflower seeds. And we're ready to serve. And they really do hold up for a long time, so you don't have to worry about putting them into the, covering them and keeping them warm, because they're kind of good. They'll wait for you if they last. My soup and bread book is number 29. That's the 29th book. And I was just asked to do a proposal for a new casserole book. And I'm also working on my memoirs, which is cooking up a book. So if those come out, that'll be number 30 or 31 or whatever. 29 books is, I figured that should be a good number, but I don't know, we'll see.
Funding for Bea Ojakangas' Welcome to My Kitchen is provided by the citizens of Minnesota through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.